when we do all like these polling and focus groups after the election, when we say that democracy was being threatened, voters were definitely telling us that they never believed that that was true, that they believed that our America is so resilient that it could withstand somebody as dangerous as Trump, that people believe in America so much that our democracy would never be torn down by one individual.
So, just to let you know, so I've been drafting questions and doing research for the last few weeks, but every day things have been changing. I'm just like, okay, now I have to scrap this entire list, something completely different because all of that. But I do want to talk a little bit about, well, first off, thank you so much for coming.
I am in love being here. First of all, your studio is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I loved you when you ran, so I'm sure we could talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah.
And there's a whole new thing for Democrats. As you know, we are way behind in media and catching up with how we should be communicating with voters.
For sure.
And this is one thing that we need to be doing more, talking with content creators and podcasters.
Well, we appreciate your time to come down and chat with us. If you weren't doing this, what's a completely different career path you could see yourself in?
I would be writing cookbooks for people in recovery from eating disorders. That is
Seriously?
what I do. Yes. Before I was in political work, I had an eating disorder and went through a recovery program, and I worked in that field for a little bit.
Sure.
And there's really actually no cookbooks for people with recovery that are going through recovery. And it sounds counterintuitive, like if you have an eating disorder, you don't want to even think about cooking and eating, but obviously you have to because it's your recovery process. So that's what I would do.
Wow, that is a beautiful career. I guess that's one of those things you don't think about.
Yeah.
You know, really quick, I do want to talk about the ASDC and the National Democratic Strategy. So the Association of State Democratic Committees strengthens parties through funding, messaging, and grassroots organizing. What was something that drove you to run and throw your name in the hat for that position?
You know, I think one of the biggest things that I realize in the Democratic Party is one of the strongest thing we have is every single state and territory has a state party. And is the organizing mechanism that we have in order to recruit volunteers, register voters, recruit candidates, constantly doing trainings, constantly visiting with voters, and they don't get enough funding. And I've been on the front lines, obviously, of our state party for the past 8 years. I've seen firsthand how little they are treated with respect within the Democratic ecosphere, how the party committees at the national level do them. And yet they're the one, every single state, who are on a daily basis responsible for winning elections and recruiting candidates. So there's this major disconnect of, we talk about local elections and we talk about winning at the local and state level, but yet we're not funding the very institution that's responsible for that. So I wanted to run for that position to make the case to the national donors that we need to start funding state parties in real ways if we're going to win again.
I guess a lot of people don't. I was talking to some friends about it and they just didn't know about that.
Yes.
You know, I feel like there's kind of a disconnect. So you talked a little bit about, catching up with the media game. What is a strategy to communicate with voters and reach out to people for that? What are some new innovative grassroots ways that you guys plan on working toward that with DC?
One of the things is we have to start showing voters that we can organize the protests. And that may sound so simple, but we have been turning to groups like Move On and Indivisible, but there's no, my state parties, for example, aren't organizing the town halls if the Republicans aren't going to hold town halls during the recess that's coming up starting on March 13th. State parties can organize those town halls. And so we're having a call with parties, giving them guides on how to organize halls. There's no reason that, and we just did it today, Don Bacon did to defund SNAP benefits. And so instead of just holding a regular press conference, we held a press conference with Black Men United, a food pantry in North Omaha. We not only donated some money to the food pantry, but we brought items that they needed. We worked with them ahead of time to make sure that we were bringing items that they specifically needed. And we put that information out on social media. And the next time the Republicans vote on their budget, a model of what our county parties are going to do all across our state. It's not just about electing Democrats. That's, of course, our main job. How do we show voters that we deeply count them as Democrats while Republicans continue to show that they're cruel?
A lot of people are concerned with everything that's going on. And you
Yeah.
talked about showing the voters that they deeply care. I don't want to litigate too much what happened with the 2024 presidential election. But one thing that I was curious to gather your thoughts on was, I mean, hindsight is obviously 2020. Is there anything that the Democrats should have done differently or should have done or have not have done this past 2024 presidential cycle? What are your thoughts on that?
I think we made a lot of mistakes, and that's clear because we didn't win the election. I think there's obviously a bright spot that I continue to be proud of. We were the only battleground target to win a congressional district,
Right.
so good job, Nebraska. And I think that's for one specific reason. When they gave us their battle plan of how they were going to win the 2nd congressional district, they actually were not targeting North and South Omaha. They came to us saying that those voters were going to turn out Kamala Harris. And my and Precious McKesson, our executive directors,
She's
heads
awesome.
were literally like about to explode. And we had legislative races happening in those districts as well. And so we basically told the campaign, look, fine, go focus on West Omaha. We understand that that's where the suburban voters are that your campaign is targeting.
Sure.
But we are going to take money then and invest in a massive field voter registration, vote by mail in these districts. Because we not only have ledge seats that we have to protect, we had Ashley Spivey, who was being attacked by an independent.
Yeah.
And, why did you spend so much money on that race? And I was like, because a Black Democratic woman who an independent corporate independent was trying to take her seat. And so, in the people's seat. So we spent a lot of money there. And I am convinced if the Democratic Party in Nebraska had not spent resources, we knew the voters, right? And we knew that those races and those voters were critical for her, not only Spivey and the other Democrats to win, Kamala Harris to win. We would have lost the blue dot. If we would have said what other state party chairs have told me, they're like, we didn't know we could inject ourselves into their plan. It was the presidential, but we focused on other things. That's the big problem that we have. Is oftentimes what happens is the presidential candidates parachute themselves in. They come in 3 months or 6 months before the election, and there is no actual coordination with the state party. There's no coordination with the down ballot candidates, and it is totally disjointed. And it shouldn't be that way. We all literally want the same thing. We want every Democratic candidate up and down the ballot. So we should be sharing resources. We should be sharing field targets, office space.
Right.
And those things sound so simple, but it doesn't.
They make a
happen.
huge difference.
It makes a huge difference.
And I guess I didn't know that wasn't a thing. First off, it was wild because President Biden just dropped and then immediately endorsed Vice President Harris. So that threw everybody into kind of disarray. And Precious was talking about how they had a lot of Biden Harris merch and everything already printed, ready to distribute.
That's right.
And then everything kind of just took a complete 180. But what she was able to do with the 100 days that she had was remarkable.
And I think, there were some demographics that we just have lost touch with, right? So nationwide, we've lost touch with rural voters, not just this election cycle, over several cycles. And that's not just white voters. That is Latino voters. That's African-American voters. There are voters that look like America living in rural America. And we've lost touch with rural America. We've also, reality is we've lost touch with the bro vote, right? We have lost touch with white kind of middle class male voters. They think that our party is too focused on women, and some of their complaints are ridiculous and totally wacky, and I'm not going to bow down to that. But I also want to make sure that men know that they have a place in our party and that we actually do represent not only issues that they deeply care about, like making sure that their kids can go to college and that their families can afford a house and health insurance, but some of the issues that they also care about.
Why do you think that is?
I think Trump in the podcast that they were listening to.
The podcast bros?
It's this whole like strongman argument.
Okay.
And, this is a small little anecdote, but when I was getting my hair cut, one of the other women next to me, she was cutting, another girl's hair, and she was talking about how she's not involved in politics, but this guy that she's dating is reading all these things on Reddit, and she, her eyes are now open to all these things that RFK is saying. And I was just listening to it, and I was like, oh my God, like all of these conspiracy theories happening on the podcast and on Reddit from RFK and Joe Rogan, it is like being interpreted from guys to their girlfriends who might not be politically engaged. And it's just, it definitely impacted this election cycle. And we as Democrats have to realize that. We've totally missed out on communicating with voters. We've believed that voters wanted short, 30-second, 1-minute information, and that people weren't going to, we had short attention spans. That was the belief, short attention spans. But people do want to listen to podcasts. They do want to listen to audio. Like they do want to do this as they're working, et cetera.
A lot of people do gravitate to that.
Yes.
You know, and that right-wing media ecosphere dominated so heavily. I was watching the president's first address to Congress, and he was using a child cancer survivor as a political tool when they just cut childhood cancer research.
100%.
And people know that. So either they don't know that or choose not to look into that. You know, I have a lot of people who are Trump voters who follow me online or are friends with me on Facebook who were talking about how the Democrats didn't stand or didn't applaud for that one child. But it's like, these people aren't serious.
No, that's right. And it's the same tactic that Elon Musk does when he carries his child around as he's literally a wrecking ball to our federal government. They often use individuals as shields to shield the cruelty that they are doing. And so, the Democrats didn't stand. It's not because they don't support that child. Of course they do. But they don't support Donald Trump cutting literally childhood cancer research.
So 2026, I mean, the 2024 elections just happened. 2020 is next year.
Yeah.
What are kind of the big, you touched on a little bit earlier, but what are kind of the main messaging and things that you think the Democratic National is going to be focused on to try to win back the House and the Senate for Democrats?
I think there's a couple big themes. You hear Bernie Sanders talking about that the Republicans in Elon and Donald Trump support oligarchy. They are allowing a billionaire class to completely take over. When you start to actually dig into this, realize that Elon Musk is into this theory about dark enlightenment, and that it's not just the Republicans kind of shrinking the government into the size of a bathtub, which used to be like their talking point back in the 80s and 90s, that literally them deciding that there should be a monarch, that's like their philosophy, that the government should be run by corporations. And you can start to see it. I am betting that the Post Office, the National Park Service, FAA will be the first 3 agencies that are privatized and that are run by corporations. And you'll start to see more and more agencies under Trump and Musk happen in that sense. And this is basically Musk's philosophy. So that's one theme, is that we shouldn't allow billionaires to take over our government. The other one is that Republicans are cruel, that they do not care about the American people. They care about their billionaire donors getting their little slice of the pie. They don't care about working class and middle class families.
Which is fascinating because he ran on like a populist message.
That's right. Yeah. It is a bait and switch. It is a constant bait and switch with Trump. His whole entire career has been a bait and switch. It's what he's doing to the American people. And I never blame the voters, right? And I know that some Democrats are so frustrated with Trump voters that they are basically the fuck around and find out, memes online. I get it. I get that frustration. But I feel for the people who believed in Trump and really did think that he was going to do changes like making IVF and all these other things that people believed that he was going to do.
And so for people watching or listening, the dangers of privatizing things such as the U.S. Postal Service. I mean, when you run a business, running a 40-cent stamp all the way out to Western Nebraska isn't going to help your profits.
That's right.
So there's some things that when you rely on private ones to handle, a lot of things slip through the cracks, and a lot of people are left behind.
That's right.
And I guess people don't think of things that way.
No, that's right. Just take Nebraska. If we would have only had private corporations bringing electricity to Nebraska, rural Nebraska would still be without electricity.
Wow.
The only reason we have electricity in rural Nebraska is because our public power utilities brought that electricity to our rural communities. It was not going to be profitable to string electricity to 10 homes in Custer.
Sure.
But our government did that. Our public power did that. Do you think it's going to be profitable to keep schools in rural areas open? No. They're going to basically tell those schools, you're going online, or you're only going to be open 3 days a week, or you're going to be consolidating
To
4
one
different
school,
counties.
yeah.
So that's exactly what's going to happen. It's all going to be about the bottom line, then making sure that people are living to their fullest potential and making sure that Americans are actually getting the services they need.
What do Democrats need to do differently this time for 2.0 than they did the first time around? Because, I mean, Marco Rubio got unanimous from the Senate role.
Yes.
You know, so it just seems like the era of bipartisan politics and, you know, trying to find middle ground seems like it's gone.
I think a Rubio vote were to have happened today, he would not have gotten those votes. I think in those beginning weeks, Democrats were still living under this assumption that there were areas that we could find common ground on, and then we were going to resist Trump in others. And it kind of Trump plan of 2016. That is out the window at this point. Number one, we have Elon Musk now. We did not have Elon Musk last time.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And that is a whole new world that none of us planned for, that we're still finding our bearings on.
Or have even experienced.
No. We literally have a billionaire making a wrecking ball, but controlling how the government is working and how the cabinet working and firing people. And it's a whole new space that none of us expected and that we're all still finding our footing on, and that Chuck Schumer and Leader Jeffries are clearly still finding a way to push back on. And so that's clearly one issue that we're dealing with. I think you haven't seen the streets like we saw in 2016 and 2017, because I do think that we have found more sophisticated ways to push back. You know, I do think that the phone calls that people are doing to this House matter. I know some people are like, oh my God, that's so lame. They're just phone calls, but they matter. It is clogging up the ability for the House Republicans to get business done. I think us holding town halls in Republican districts, if they don't hold those town halls, is going to be important. Have a space to voice their concerns. We're going to collect those concerns and give them to them. Some people will say we're giving Republicans an out, but from my perspective, it's Democrats' responsibility to stand up and show that this is what a government looking like. Your House members and your senators should be holding town halls.
What are your thoughts on halls?
Well, you know,
Republicans that have been getting shouted down, because I have a theory. So when Democrats started doing the virtual call-ins and they were getting thousands and thousands of people call these virtual calls, I think they looked at that, thought to themselves, hey, I want to in on this, like, you know, social media viral moment, whatever. But it turned out to be completely different than what they thought it was going to be, because you look at these Republicans in these ruby red districts holding these town halls, and you have what you would visibly assume to be conservative voters shout down and holding them accountable. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on those are, because it's wild to see those videos come out.
I just think citizens have had enough. They don't want a billionaire destroy government. You know, I think when we talk about we the people, we take that seriously, as in that we see the government as a reflection of us, the people.
Right.
We don't see it as just a bunch of bureaucrats. And do we want our government being efficient, and could government be trimmed? Of course we are, but we don't think a wrecking ball should be happening. We certainly don't think tariffs should be happening, destroy our ag economy, especially in a state, Nebraska. And I think that we saw how the Tea Party completely took over town halls and started doing phone calls and being aggressive during the years when we were trying to get Obamacare passed. And that really influenced how then that policy was shaped. We don't have a public option because the Tea Party really did take a very aggressive stance in those town halls. I don't like the fact that they took out the public option, but they did. And so voices matter. And that's my message to citizens, is let Republicans off the hook.
So a lot of people had been expressing frustration with the way Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have been handling things. I mean, are there any suggestions, or what do you think could be done differently? I was pretty young when Obama was elected the first time, but from what I gathered, Republicans who were in the minority at the time did a whole lot to block things to move forward during the Obama administration. You know, a lot of people expressed frustration that Reese and Schumer are not meeting the moment with as much opposition as they should.
Mm-hmm. It's Democrats' nature to work coalition with people. And so that is their initial reaction, and that go to kind of actions. And that is what you saw Democrats do initially, right? With the Marco Rubio vote, for example. But I think they have quickly realized that that is not going to be the behavior and actions that they need to do, because it is so serious about saving America at this point. I think you are going to see both Jeffries and Schumer acting very differently. I think even last week, you've seen them begin to act differently. I also think that both of them are so used to always staying in their lane, meaning I'm going to stay in the Senate, I'm going to stay in the House, and that's it. Like, this is my responsibility. Last night, for example, Jeffries came on a joint event with Chair Martin of the DNC, and 100,000 people came on the event. And we had other House members kind of talking to grassroots activists, grassroots Democrats about what's happening in the House. And we've basically asked Leader Jeffries to do that more. We want to hear more from them. What is it like on the inside? Because making all these assumptions. And I think that just like we are figuring it out, they are figuring it out too. And so I'm asking everybody to keep on giving ideas. Like, we've heard from people, if the Republicans aren't going to hold town halls, we want Democrats to do that. So that's what we're going to do. We've heard from folks too, like, I want to see Democrats more at these protests. We're going to start doing that. So I want to hear from grassroots activists more about what we should be doing. I also am trying to re-educate activists on what we do as Democrats and what we need their help doing. I want to build more county parties. Right now we have 93 counties. We have 63 county parties. We need to get more county parties in the areas that we don't have them. We need to register 25% more Democrats. That's going to be a challenge to do nationwide in my role as the head of the State Party Association. I don't care what state you are, we can register 25% more Democrats. And we got to recruit more down ballot candidates. There were way too many open lines, whether you're in Nebraska or even in California in rural areas. We've got to start working on that now. I think owning the mistakes, we did a lot of gains. I could talk about all the things we did right as Democrats in Nebraska and nationwide, but we also made a bunch of mistakes. There's a reason we're not in power. So we have to correct those mistakes, but it's going to mean all of us using the Democratic Party infrastructure and not working outside the Democratic Party infrastructure.
So with 2026 around the corner, are there any specific races that you think should have much more attention paid to them? Whether in Nebraska or around the country, different congressional districts. I mean, Don Bacon's seat,
yes,
I mean, is one that's just a given. But, you know, some areas that some people might not be thinking, some states that people might not have on their radars.
Yeah. So I'll quickly say Nebraska, but then I'll talk nationwide. So of course, you know, the 2nd congressional district is going to be a focus of ours. A Democratic candidate is going to be announcing soon. Soon. Yes, very soon. And we're very excited about it.
There is a candidate.
There is a candidate. We're very excited. We are also, you know, very clearly interested on who's going to run against Ricketts. Some discussions about that happening right now. Pillen is up for re-election, and there's a Democratic candidate thinking about announcing soon against Pillen.
Oh, wow.
Hilgers is up, and we have somebody who's interested in running for Attorney General. So it's a very different feel as Democratic Party chair this cycle than it was 4 years ago when these statewide races were up. So it's a different feel. Last time we were begging people to run for these statewide races and everybody was like, no, 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 no. This time people are coming to us saying, I'm ready. I know it's going to be an uphill battle, but I am ready to do this and be the opposition party. So that's very good news. Nationwide, we're telling folks, look, you have to start looking on the top of the ticket, these really kind of, you know, exciting races that everybody focuses on. Those are important. But I'm talking about county commission races, city council races, mayors. These are the races that really deeply care about, if you care about climate change, these are the races that do the zoning, that approve the solar, the wind, that can block eminent domain from a pipeline being used or can put zoning in place to protect a community from a toxic, you know, coal plant. So if you're a young person looking to get into politics, I am always telling them, please look at the city council races, the county commissioners. Look at running for mayor. These are the races that you can have the most direct impact. And where you don't have to raise $3 million or $2 million. You can look at raising $1,000 and be a competitive race.
Wow. That's fascinating. I cannot wait to see who is going to be throwing their names in the hat. You know, we had a very surprising race against Deb Fischer.
Yes.
With Dan. What were your kind of takeaways from that cycle? You know, he outperformed what I think a lot of people thought was going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First of all, I love Dan Osborne. I know that the press did all these weird things about, you know, Dan and I've had supper and cocktails with Dan a couple times since the race, having supper with him actually on Friday. Dan and I get along. You know, I was not happy with the way that his campaign rolled out, that he wasn't going to, you know, take the Democratic Party's endorsement. I think both him and I have learned, if he were to ever run again as an independent for an office, how we would do that differently next time.
People come in to run his campaign.
Yes. Okay. And, you know, so I think both him and I learned lessons on that. We would do that differently. The Democratic Party is open to supporting independents when we Democratic candidate running. I think it is actually something beautiful for our state, for Democrats and independents to form an alliance, to form a coalition to break up the one-party rule. Our state is very unique. We do have a lot of independents. We have a very strong independent spirit in our state, especially with our nonpartisan unicameral. So, you know, Dan really tapped into a lot of working class and middle class voters. His ads were obviously very spirited and creative and unique and broke through a lot of the noise. Deb Fischer took her office for granted and didn't see him coming, and I think wrote him off as, you know, some mechanic who didn't understand the issues. And the reality is, Dan understands a lot of complicated issues. And I have to say that I would rather have more teachers, more mechanics, you know, more bartenders,
more waitresses, more everyday people.
In office. We would probably solve more problems.
Yeah. You know, I think I'm kind of worried about the state of American democracy.
We all are, brother. And we laugh because we're terrified.
It's the most fascinating thing for me, to go online and see a lot of people, federal workers, people who have children on IEPs, people who rely on these benefits such as Medicare and Medicaid, and the possibility of cutting Social Security and all of that kind of stuff, who then, you know, put out these social media posts saying they voted for Trump, but they didn't think that he was going to do this. You know, you talked about like the bait and switch, but even then, like, I feel like some people see the stuff that's happening, but still don't feel like it's his fault.
Yeah, and I think this is going to take Democrats connecting the dots, explaining a lot of this. And you bring up IEP. Our middle kid is on the spectrum. She's been on an IEP ever since she was 2. Before she was in the public school system, the daycare that she went to identified that Maya wasn't speaking. The public school system stepped in. She's been on an IEP ever since she was 2. Maya would not be who she is today, being able to think about going to a 4-year college, if it wasn't for the public schools and the IEP that she has. That all can completely go away with Donald Trump and his executive order that's coming out that is going to abolish the Department of Education, which is the only thing that funds IEPs and special education. And people out there will say, oh, well, the states will pick that up. Money. And that's assuming that your governor believes that that should be funded. So we're going to a situation again where some states are going to have programs, some states aren't, rather than a level playing field, which is exactly what the Department of Education did. They made sure that we had a level playing field for our kiddos. And so that's our responsibility now as Democrats. We have to start connecting these dots and making sure that folks know that this is because of Trump and Elon Musk, because of something that Biden did, because I'm sure they're going to start to try to blame this on Biden, just like they're continuing to blame things right now. You saw Donald Trump in the State of the Union continuing to blame things on Biden.
I don't think a lot of people understand, like, they keep talking about the federal Department of Education, and, you know, a lot of Trump voters say that it needs to go, but how you mentioned with the level playing field, I don't think it registers in people's mind, making sure that schools are accessible with elevators and wheelchair ramps, things like that. Those are all mandated from the federal Department of Education, and if a school doesn't have that, then they step in to make sure that everyone has that level playing field. And none of us live in a state that's going to be able to pick that up. And if so, one thing that I will keep missing is there's a lot of blue states that in federal taxes that funded education to
Correct.
have these deep red states who don't prioritize education as much as they should to make sure that their students have that. Like in Oklahoma, that's ranked like 48, the superintendent there, you've seen the media tour.
Yeah.
He was auditioning. Every time there's a new president, everybody auditions for, some kind of role. So he was trying to get the Bibles that Trump put out. He was trying to do all of these
The 10
things
Commandments he wanted in every school.
to please Trump, probably some kind of secretary of education, what have you. But that's more for people listening or watching that realize the big role that the federal Department of Education has on your local schools. There was a school board in Texas that voted to close like 3 elementary schools. I don't know if you saw that. It didn't make a lot of waves, but I don't.
Parts of Missouri, they are on a 4-day schedule.
Seriously?
For their schools. Yes, parts of Missouri are on a 4-day schedule because they can't afford to keep their schools open 5 days. And so this is what is going to happen mostly in red states, because you're 100% correct. The blue states have basically been subsidizing the red states because it's prioritized tax cuts, property tax cuts. They start to slash it, which then means Medicaid, Medicare, all these other services, education, social programs get cut. You know what happened in our state when Joe Hans was governor? He promised that we were going to do community-based mental health care. They closed all the inpatient residential care for folks that were mentally ill. That meant a lot more homelessness. It meant a lot more burden on nonprofits that were caring for mentally folks. And it meant families who couldn't care loved ones, because that is a very difficult and high skilled, program that you need to have, nursing program. And so this is what is going to happen to our social fabric. Republicans constantly come back to cruelty versus caring.
There's been a lot of talk on 2028 already.
Yes, already.
Which is wild. I think after Vice President Harris, left, and we talked about it on the show a lot of times, it was like she's going to show up on January 20th, do everything stewed, and then she's going to fly back to California with her family and live her life. Because I saw that there was a huge drop in youth voters and, people in swing states, specifically places like Pennsylvania and Michigan that have a huge Arab American population, saying that they wanted to punish the vice president for what Democrats had not done, specifically with what is going on in Israel versus Hamas. And that I think that people forget that Kamala Harris is very well off, So I mean, so a lot of people talk about how Trump needed to become president, stay out of jail, right? Like he needed that presidential immunity.
Yes, he did.
This was not something that Kamala Harris, necessarily needed for her own personal benefit, her own personal gain. But everything that she had talked about on the campaign trail has already happened 6 weeks in. Everything that is going on in Israel and the foreign policy and stuff. And I also want to get your reaction to the White House explosive, conversation that happened. I don't know if it was a conversation between Vance, Trump, and Zelensky.
Yeah. So one, that was just a complete disrespectful showing of how we do diplomacy. And I think it is going to cause irreparable damages, not just between us and Ukraine, but just us and the world. Right. They're looking at us like we're a laughingstock. And, Trump treats office like we are in a reality TV show. I mean, I literally...
This is going to make for good TV.
Yeah, I thought I was watching Housewives, of, the Oval Office. And so I think that that's awful. And of course, Zelensky is going to do everything he can to save his country. And so, if, you saw him immediately the next day putting things on social media to try to calm the waters, because that's exactly what he needs to do, because he's dealing with a madman. So I think he's going to do whatever he needs to do in order to calm things down and keep his country whole. But this will do damage to us in our standing in the world. In Kamala Harris, you are right that, yes, she can go to California and live a wonderful life. But the reality is, and I hope it's true, that she runs for governor or she runs for some future position, because we need her voice. I think that We don't have enough Black women and enough Asian Pacific Islander women running off in higher office in our country with their voice and their platform in their experiences. And we made a huge mistake as the Democratic Party, not reaching young voters, not reaching our swing voters, and not admitting that we were a mistake in not communicating the pain Palestinian families were facing.
Right.
We were standing up for the Israeli families as we should. We were not doing that in equal of the Palestinian families. And that was a massive mistake. Obviously, we know that now. A lot of us knew that even during the campaign, but we couldn't get ahead of the president. As Democrats, that's what you do. Maybe that was a mistake and we should have.
Do you see her running again in 2028 for president?
Not for president, but I could see her running for governor.
Yeah.
And I think she'd be a governor. I think in 2028, you're going to see folks that already started to see their names. I think you'll see people like Pete, but maybe Pete's going to be running for Senate. That's the word on the street, that he may be running for Senate in Michigan. But, I think you're going to see Pritzker and Whitmer and, Bashir and some of the names that he has already heard. But you'll maybe see people that we aren't thinking of.
Sure.
So
Governor Whitmer.
Yeah.
I met her in New York at the Webby Awards.
Oh, okay.
She is, whoever's on her media team is amazing. The people who do her social media are wild, because they won the Barbie movie.
For the Barbie.
Yeah, for Governor in Pink and all of that. Pretty cool. She was really, really cool. And you talked about like fighting back against the oligarchy and having that kind of be the message for the midterms and stuff. I think people should focus more on populism too, though, because a lot of people were saying Trump is a threat to democracy. He's a threat to democracy. They were running the January 6 tapes and all of that during the 2024 presidential election, but people still voted him in. It almost seems like that no longer is going to work.
Yeah. When we do all like these polling and focus groups after the election, when we say that democracy was being threatened, voters were definitely telling us that they never believed that that was true, that they believed that our America is so resilient that it could withstand somebody as dangerous as Trump, that people believe in America so much that our democracy would never be torn down by one individual. That's obviously beautiful testament to Americans' belief in our America.
Sure.
But also maybe not realistic with the type of threat that Trump and Musk and Russia, which is what I think is the true threat that is happening right now. So that's a reality here. I do think that there are just some real life issues that we're going to be running on, right? Prices going to continue to be something that we will run on, even though that's not like a heart and gut issue. But grocery prices will continue to be something, and housing prices, healthcare prices. But I think if Donald Trump and Musk continue to do what they're going to do, you're going to see rural hospitals and public schools closing. You're going to see post offices closing. You're going to see some major institutions that we are all relying on daily basis start to shut down and crumble around us. And so that's obviously going to be something that we as Democrats connect the dots on. And then I think as Americans, we always want to, which is why so many bipartisan people voted for Barack Obama, we want believe and hope and the promise of America. We want to believe in a bigger vision of where we're going as Americans. And so we not only want to fight back against Trump and Elon Musk, but we want to also offer what are the hopeful things. I often talk about as Democrats, why aren't we, and this is something that we are going to start doing, why aren't we talking about expanding public education? Kids' public education could start in pre-K and go all the way through 2 years of community college. That could be a kid's, public education experience rather than just kindergarten through high school, and start creating more vision and more hope for Americans to start believing in the Democratic Party again.
As someone who's constantly online, I do see kind of the voter regret starting to see of people reading what is coming down the pipeline, like what is actually really going to happen. And you had seen like voting trends on Google of, can I take my vote back? I don't think people really understood the severity, for one, of just like kind of
Trump didn't quote unquote do so much damage the last time, but take a press pause for a second. we all experienced COVID. Like that's
Right.
something also that I'm not sure like people and we
Remember.
as Democrats maybe drilled down enough. COVID would not have been as bad if there was a Democrat in the White House putting in protocol that initially outbreak happened. But we experienced 2 years of crisis because Trump was in office. And
Didn't they get rid of like the pandemic response that the Obama administration put in place during the Ebola outbreak?
Correct. So, like we are in a serious, I think, reckoning for what these next 4 years are going to be like. Now, imagine when the next crisis happens and you have Elon Musk and you basically already have the government totally gutted out. What is going to happen? What is going to happen when we have the hurricanes and the tornadoes and we have no weather service? These are all major issues that we as a country are going to have to be grappling with.
And they already like stopped out communication from these different agencies, like the Health and Human Services and all of that. So people are kind of in the dark with everything going on with like the measles right now. And
Correct.
a child unfortunately passed from being infected who was unvaccinated from the reporting that came out in Texas. So, a lot of it was all in Project 2025.
It was all in Project 2025. And when Democrats were talking about that, I think people thought it was just this right-wing kind of conspiracy theory document. This was their framework. This was basically their path of what they were going to do to the government, and they're absolutely doing it. Folks should look into that, Google that. This is Elon Musk's political philosophy. It's a bit terrifying, and it reads a little bit like sci-fi. But this is kind of Silicon Valley's political philosophy on how our government should be run, or basically not run, because they want to break it apart. And this is also the path that they're going down. So we have Project 2025 mixed with dark Enlightenment political philosophy, and it is a mixture of disaster for America. As Democrats, as progressives, as independents, we now have to have very backbones. We have to make sure that we're not only voting in our local elections, like in Lincoln and Omaha in 2025, but we have to really start organizing and each other grace when we mess up, but making sure that we're going even stronger because we have to not only strengthen our county parties, our state parties, but we got to recruit a lot more candidates to run in 26 if we're going to combat the basically taking over our government by the oligarchy of Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
I did miss a question. What are some of the biggest local political fights happening in Nebraska right now that people are not paying attention to?
Well,
because we have a very, very special form of government with our unicameral.
Yes, we do. So, there's of course the city elections that are happening that some people may not even be aware of. In Lincoln and Omaha, we are acting our city council, school board in Lincoln, and the airport authority in Omaha, we're electing a mayor and city council members. In the rest of the state, we don't have those electing. I think, in the unicameral legislature, we're still the blue dot. Right now, the split roll vote is still stuck in committee, but Jim Pillen just today sent out this letter saying that this is the one thing that Donald Trump is asking for. I mean, it's just totally bizarre. So we're still,
With the blue dot?
Yes, we're still battling that. It was stuck in committee. We thought it's going to be fine. It won't be a battle this year. Maybe we'll have to deal with it. It gets closer to 28. But oh no, Jim Pillen sent out a letter again today to all the state senators saying this is what Donald Trump wants. That's the one thing that he wants.
I sometimes have a hard time keeping up with everything because it's constant news alert. And I'm just I don't know if my blood pressure could take this.
Thing that I will just mention because it really gets skin is that Pillen took money away from the museum for Standing Bear. Money was allocated really from Democratic dollars that Biden had from COVID, and all that money that Justin Wayne and Terrell McKinney got allocated, some of it for the Standing Bear Museum. Jim Pillen has taken that money away, so that has really pissed me off this week. So, yeah.
No, what shit's on here? We're just protests and going out, and I think people are a lot of people are fired up, but I feel like a lot of people are feeling fatigue from all of this. People who volunteered and did things and got out there, and then now it's turn around now and go out and protest, and I just don't know how effective that is anymore. And watching the State of the Union, Al Green,
Yes,
standing up and making noise on the floor, and having to be thrown out. Like a lot of like Democrats just like quietly leave and then post something online, which also kind of rub people the wrong way, because it's like, if you're in the room, like make some get thrown out, you know, like, instead of, you know, just like quietly leaving and then posting something that was drafted hours ahead.
The Democrats definitely tried different things for the joint address. You know, some of them wore color, some of them held signs, some, of course, like Representative Green stood up and did a very public protest, which I thought was actually very effective. As you said, walked out silently. It wasn't one action. And so I hear people who are complaining that maybe they should have just decided on one action. And so I'm sure that they are debriefing, and next time maybe they will decide to do one action or all rise up together and walk out in one moment. Who knows? But I think in this moment, they're trying to experiment with different things. And so I appreciate that they all tried some different things and that there was some actions that they were doing, that they weren't just sitting there. But, you know, on the protests, this is the thing. I think some people get energy in that sense of community in the street protests. And some people are feeling a lot more energy with the calls, and some will feel energy and feel a sense of community and coming to the town halls that the Democrats are going to hold, or going to the Republican town halls if they dare to hold them. I doubt they will, but if they do, we'll be there. And then some of us are going to find energy in community service projects that are filling the gaps that the Republicans are making worse, like at food pantries. I think it's going to take all of that. You have to, as an activist, as an advocate, as a democracy defender, find the space that gives you the most joy, and that makes you feel like you have purpose. And for some of us, it's going to mean registering voters, going to our county parties, running for office ourselves. For me, my main message is there's lots of options. You can choose one thing. You can write welcome to the party postcards. You can go to your county party meeting. We have a page on our website at nebraskademocrats.org called Fight Back, and we list a lot of these things because I think you have to make a decision on what's best for you.
What's next for you in your new role as ASDC?
My goal is to make sure that the DNC budget, more than 8%, goes back to the states, because that is the current state. And we cannot win elections at the state level if state parties are getting basically 8% of the national budget. I'm hoping to get that up to 25%, just a small little cap of number. State parties, when I became chair, were only getting $2,500 a month from the DNC.
State parties.
Yeah, that's it. $2,500 a month from the DNC. Myself and Ken Martin, who's now the DNC chair, we were in charge of negotiations for the state parties. We've gotten that up to $12,500. I go into negotiations. I'm now on the other table of Ken Martin, which is weird because we were always the negotiating team for state parties, but we're a very good friend. I'm hoping to get that up to 25,000. Maybe we won't get there immediately, but that's the goal. So I want to get more funding to state parties. And then the other big project that I work on with state parties is getting a focus on partisan voter registration. About 20 years ago, big donors took money away from state parties and gave that to 501c3 groups, who I love. I love nonpartisan groups because they got tax breaks to do voter registration. Right. But the problem with that is that nonpartisan groups can't talk about being a Democrat, right? Because that's against the rules. And I obviously don't want them to. Right. They talk about issues. So we have a lot of people who care about issues and being nonpartisan more. I want that first communication with a voter to be about why I want a Democrat and why it's important to be a Democrat. And this is what Democrats care for and stand up for. So that's another project of mine as the head of the ASDC, is to work with the major donors, work with the National Party on getting more resources to state and county parties to register more Democrats.
You know, I kind of skipped this, but why do you think more Democrats and elected officials don't come on shows like this? Like, why do you think most of them, I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, like go on places like CNN, MSNBC, like the bigger outlets, and kind of just like ignore the ones? Because I mean, like, I don't have like the biggest audience, but my audience is very local, right? And they all like pay attention to everything that's happening locally and how national things impact them as well. Why do you think that is?
I think some of it is because they don't know the good podcasters and content creators. I think some of it's that because we're older. This was a big issue when we had a spike of a kind of new creative kind of content people back in 2005, 2006. Those were those, right?
Yeah.
Right. And we had to train candidates in state parties to actually engage with bloggers And that was like, oh my God, I can't do that. What if they say something bad about me? What if they ask me a weird question? And I'm like, just go with it. It's going to be fine. I promise you. So we are creating a list, even in Nebraska, and I'm training other state parties on how to do this, on just how to create a list of who the content creators and the podcasters are in your state. And basically you have to ask young people also this, because as somebody who's 50, I'm 51, you may not know who those people are. So you have to ask your kids and other young people in order to do that. But I think some of it's fear of the unknown. And I just try to tell state party chairs and candidates, like, just put your shoulders down. Don't be a robot. If you make a mistake, it's fine. Yeah. Like, it's much better to have these like longer conversations to know each other more.
And be humanized.
Be yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I with everybody, just kind of like 10 rapid fire questions, but they usually turn into like the longest Nebraska goodbye because like we think about everything. So I'll try to go through this quickly. If you could have dinner with any historical political figure, who would it be?
Jeanette Rankin. She was the first woman in Congress, got elected before women had the right to vote.
Awesome. Favorite Nebraska food or dish?
Okay, it's basically like a funeral side dish, but I love it so much. It's the peas with the cheddar cheese in it. Okay. I love that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's very good.
I'll have to look into that. What is one song that always gets you hyped?
Oh my God, I love music so much. Anything by Rural Alberta Advantage.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm trying not to like have this, because like I said, they turned into like the longest Nebraska goodbye. What is your go-to? What's your go-to a way to unwind after a long day in politics? Okay,
I am so busy with a million things because I'm an unpaid chair. So my paying job is still bold, right? We fight pipelines, we build clean energy. So I don't have time to figure out how to or crochet, blah, blah, blah. So the one thing that I love to do is cook. So that is what I do. So I love cooking. My family knows to leave me alone. I'm a really good cook. I put on music. I drink a glass of wine and I cook.
That's kind of your, okay. Try not to. I guess what's your favorite kind of like dish or kind of ethnicity to cook? I mean, do you like experiment with different kinds?
I do. I experiment all the time, and I collect cookbooks. And so I have cookbooks wherever I travel. So we went to Indonesia, Cambodia over the summer, and we got different cookbooks when we were there, and it was great.
That's fun. Mm-hmm. If you could instantly fix one political issue in America, what would it be?
Healthcare and mental health care.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Making sure people had access to it. Everybody basically should be on Medicare. We should have free access to, it should just be given to folks. We should not be worrying about getting healthcare or mental health care.
Do you think they're going to repeal Obamacare?
I think they're going to try. Mm-hmm. I think that they're going to take away a lot of the subsidies that people have been using because they won't need Congress necessarily to do that.
And just to clarify,
first of all, I think that they do need Congress to do it, but they will break the rules and it'll be held up in court.
Yeah, just to clarify, Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the exact same thing. I think that Republicans dubbed it Obamacare to kind of like a boogeyman like nickname and stuff. So people were just like, I could have the ACA, but I'm all for them gutting Obamacare. Like,
same thing.
Which is who is one person, past or present, that inspires your activism?
Paul Wellstone. He was a fighter and he was an additional Democrat. He was a wrestler and then a teacher and got into politics. He championed, along with then Senator Clinton, the mental health parity bill. That was at least a beginning to kind of force insurance companies to pay for mental health.
What's your favorite TV show or movie you've watched multiple times?
Anything to do with witches. Mayfair Witches is what I'm watching right now, but I also love Outlander. But anything kind of time travel witches, that's my jam.
Were you into Charmed?
Yes, I love
like old school Charmed.
Yeah.
My sister loved that show. If you could describe Nebraska in one word, what would it be?
Unfair. The Republicans have a stranglehold on our politics right now. It's not going to be like that forever. And back, when I became chair, we had 504 Democrats elected statewide. We have 1,020 elected now. We've worked really hard on electing down ballot Democrats. We need to get the top now elected. We're working for that.
Just a side note, because I just remembered I wanted to ask you, your husband ran for Congress 3 times.
He ran for the House in 2006 and actually came very close in one of the most conservative districts nationwide, but they dumped every member. They ran ads saying he was gay.
George Bush let him out and
Yes, George Bush did, Dick Cheney, everybody did, literally every cabinet member. And they ran illegal robocalls against Scott for 3 years, which is why we have a robocall law in the state of Nebraska now because of what they did to Scott. And then he ran for Senate thinking when Obama ran, because he did so well in the 3rd district, that he would be able to win statewide. Right. But it didn't work. But those were the only 2 times he ran.
Oh, 2 times. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. What's a skill or hobby you've always wanted to learn but hadn't had time for?
I always thought I was going to be in a band, but I can't sing. I can't play any instruments, but I love music and I love going to live concerts. So I would love to learn how to play the drums, but I have not learned.
Did you go to Lizzo when she was here?
Yes, of course.
That was immediately after, the big bills that had passed in the legislature.
Yes, and she spoke on stage and I was, praising her. Yeah.
And lastly, what's one people would be surprised to learn about you?
That I have a lot of tattoos. Maybe that. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know if people perceive me.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know either. Well, myself too, because sometimes somebody once told me when I met them in person, it was at some journalism thing in Omaha. I was having this full-on conversation with this woman, and we were talking about just a lot of stuff, and she was like, "Yeah, I actually know you really well. I just followed your stuff," and I'm like, "Well, why didn't you say that?" She's like, "I don't know." And I'm like, well, do I seem how do I seem online? She's like, you're actually much nicer in person. I was like, wait, what? I'm just like, okay, so do people think I'm mean? I always wonder that.
I always wonder, some people think I'm more conservative than I am. Some people think I'm more progressive than I am. It's very confusing sometimes when people meet me and they're like, I thought you were much more progressive, or I thought you were much more conservative. And I'm just like, okay, well, that is what it is. Yeah.
Because you were a huge Bernie supporter, right?
Oh, yeah. No, of course.
You're what they call a Bernie-crat.
Yes. No, Bernie definitely is in with a lot of my populism and belief that we have to level the playing field. He is, I deeply care about family farmers and ranchers, and they are controlled by basically 4 corporations who are constantly screwing them, go on and on about that. And so, Bernie really represents that. Ro Khanna. There's a lot of kind of Democrats. Bernie's not a Democrat, of course, but there's a lot of Democrats who you wouldn't expect who get it. And Ro Khanna is a Democrat from Silicon Valley, but he gets it. Yeah.
Anything last that you would like to share? Get off your chest. Any national news that has really upset you over the last 6 weeks?
The one thing that I will say is if your inclination is to go online and only attack Democrats, take a deep breath and say, is this actually going to help move the ball forward? If it's constructive criticism, do it, right? We hear your ideas, how we can be better and improve. But if it's just to hate on people, take a deep breath and ask yourself, is this going to help make things better? Right. If it's not, maybe send me a private email or a DM with that hate instead. I can take the arrows. I have really thick skin. But don't go online just hate to hate. We are up against truly dark forces right now with Donald Trump and Elon. And it's going to take all of us putting some of our policy differences and really working together to recruit better people, elect better people, and finally pushing back against this one-party rule in our state.
Well, thank you so much, Jane Kleeb. Didn't you also write a book?
I did. It's called Harvest the Vote, How Democrats Can Win Back in Rural America.
All right. Yeah, you guys should definitely check that out. But thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. It's been lovely interacting with your team. Very on it. Jack's very nice. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you back.
I would love to be back.
In the future, maybe after you get out, I think you got to do with ASDC and come and share with us what's happening out in America.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for being a huge light in our state. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's all.
Amazing. That was fun.
That was fun. Next on the Jazari Qual Show.
Oh, I see. Does it come in like that?
So what you do is like you plug it in here and then you loop it around.
And then go up over the ears? Oh, that does sound different. Wow. Love it.
State Senator George Duncan joins me to talk about Nebraska politics, education, the state budget, and the biggest challenges facing our communities.
The way that these pieces of ballot measures were written, specifically the paid family medical or the paid sick leave, that specifically does contemplate taking into account small businesses versus big businesses. What the voters voted on already does that. So for us to continue to try to create carve-outs and to try to provide, I guess, exceptions to the law, it's looking out for business over workers.
This is one you won't want to miss, only on the Jazari Qual Show.